Hey, hello and welcome everyone to the first ever BC May Day Solidarity Summit. I'm so pleased to be joined virtually by everyone here today on May Day Eve, April 30th, a very auspicious day in the workers' calendar. Tonight's Solidarity Summit has been a united front initiative between Socialist Action, Socialist Alternative, Democratic Socialists of England, Marxist Workers Group, and the Workers' Solidarity Network. So I'd like to thank those comrades who participated in planning this event, as well as our panelists who have graciously agreed to speak tonight. The purpose of tonight's discussion is twofold, really. One, to share experiences as class-conscious organizers and address the question of intersectional solidarity and the barriers we face in the labor movement and overcoming divides under capitalism. And two, to carry on that understanding into the future by creating a network of activists, organizers, and supporters inside and outside the labor movement who are willing to challenge the status quo power structures within the institutions they participate in. So this is a night about putting together a bit of theory with a bit of praxis. Inspiration for this initiative came from my observation of the Workers' Action movement and the Labour May Day Committee by comrades in Ontario. These are both United Front project-based initiatives with different socialist organizations that provide a grassroots militant alternative to the labor bureaucracy that leads most labor events. The Workers' Action movement in particular has the aim of winning leadership seats within organized labor institutions and developing, growing, and building a militant base of support within the unions. We are a long way off from running a candidate at the BC Fed or anything, but today's goal is primarily connection, to get on each other's radar and on the landscape of possibility. That's the first step. One small step out of the shadows and into the open in solidarity as radical movement leaders. We need each other for that. Capital powers systematically and ruthlessly thwart dissent and the cultural, social, psychological, and material injury that can result of being branded a problematic rabble-rouser, a terrorist sympathizer, a fascist commie, whatever that means, or whatever else can be difficult to bear alone. But we don't need to bear it alone. Individualism and sectarianism is how we put targets on our backs. We have power in numbers and in each other. Just as we see now, how the student Gaza solidarity encampments are gaining strength in community defense and collective action, so we as socialists and anti-capitalists can find refuge and protection in solidarity against capitalist exploitation and the fascism it inevitably descends into. And yet we're constantly encouraged to make the most of our differences. We're polarized, tribalize, and recede from the mainstream by the media and political class. Could it be that it serves big capital's interest to keep the working class in a scattered, unorganized state? I think we all know the answer. Tonight will be devoted to strategizing and discussing just how we can achieve collective results through collective action. Class-conscious organizers are like hidden gems scattered all around British Columbia. Not all of us can make it down to every street rally or demonstration. And while we, of course, support such direct action, a united front of socialist organizations and trade unionists has the potential to think and plan on a deeper, more systemic, and more long-term basis that ultimately heads down the road of overturning capitalism. So with all that said, please see the link in the chat to sign up for our mailing list and stay connected that way. I will also put a link to a Discord server. Okay, so getting to the speakers now. Unfortunately, two of our panelists, one from Tri-City for Palestine and another from Rama Okanagan, had to cancel rather suddenly, but fear not, we have an excellent lineup. So we'll be hearing from Arnie Nagy, Liz Cronin, Stephen Crozier, and then Tristan Waibu, and then open it up for questions and comments. Okay, so our first speaker is Arnie Nagy. Arnie started working in the fishing industry at 15 years old in Haida Gwaii. For 35 years, he was part of the leadership with the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union, serving on the board as an officer for 5 years as vice president. During these years, he was a labor organizer, worked on many environmental campaigns fighting dangerous industrial planning, fought for maintaining strong EI benefits, and continues to be a strong advocate for Indigenous sovereignty as a member of the Haida Nation. Welcome, Arnie. Please take it away. You have 10 minutes, and I'll give you a warning at the 2-minute mark. Thank you.
So my name's Arnie Nagy. I live and work on the unceded territories of the 9 allied tribes of Lakwalams and Metlakatla, also known as Prince Rupert. I'm the Aboriginal advocate here in Prince Rupert. My Haida name is Talatskachin which means strong salmon voice. I grew up in a union household, began working in the fishing industry at the age of 15, in which my mother was one of the union organizers. I'm not going to get a lot into the history, but I want to talk a little bit about trade unionism and um, some other issues that I have seen in my 35 years in organizing and as part of a leadership and political activist within the UFAW. I think what we tend to see and what in the trade union movement is there's always a hierarchy by the leadership. In the UFAW, there was one rule. Everybody that I worked with, and that rule was it didn't matter what your education was or whatever, you always had to place yourself 3 steps below your membership. That way, the membership feels comfortable in approaching you to deal with issues that would be bothering them. And no matter how small an issue is to you and how easily you could correct those situations, it's a big impact on that person's well-being in the demand to be made whole in the workplace. This, for those of you, it looks like there's an awful lot of young people, but just to give you a little bit more history, 40 and a half years ago, there was a general strike held here in British Columbia. It was called Solidarity. The whole province, schools, everything was shut down. And it was going very good. I managed to shut down the college that I was at, and the only ones that were allowed to stay on campus were the ones that had to travel too far. So we basically gave them permission and some of the staff there to prepare food for those that stayed on campus. It was going great. I've never seen the labor movement united in that type of a fight. The issue came, and why I felt, and I still feel today, that it was settled too early is because Operation Solidarity, the general strike, started falling apart. Because the coalitions that were built started developing their own agendas and branching off from the main goal, which was at that time the fight over Bills 19 and 20. And the leadership of the BC Fed, along with other, I call them business unions, cut a backroom deal without informing the membership. The rule that I have always grown up with is the membership sets the strikes. The membership decides when those strikes come to an end, not the leadership. The leadership is spokesperson for the workers and its membership, not to make those kind of unilateral decisions. As a matter of fact, it was that principle of the membership deciding who lifts a strike and who goes on strike that sent the officers of our union to jail in 1967 because the president refused to lift the strike when the courts ordered him to. He told them the membership decides. I can't make that decision. It's not in our constitution. So I think as we progress and things start to build, you have to remember that the membership has to be the ones that make the decisions. As leaders and as activists, we're only the spokesperson for those memberships. I worked in the private sector with the UFAW and the fish plants. I've been to many BC Fed conventions and challenged the agenda that I seen going on at the BC Fed. The difference between a business union and the private sector union that I was in was we weren't just dues collectors. We backed our membership's position and we took it and we fought for those issues. There wasn't the hierarchy that we see through many big trade unions here in British Columbia and across Canada. My union is part of the Unifor now. We merged back in the 1997, I believe it was. But anyways, there's still that bureaucracy there, but we've been given autonomy on how we look after things. And it's that lack of the bureaucracy that made us successful and still being around. In 1989, the first free trade strike ever fought in Canada was fought on the West Coast in the commercial fishing industry. And I can tell you, in the town that I live at back then was 17,000. It was a very, very difficult time where guns were being pulled, fights in the bars, scabs would go down and cut their boats loose and kick them out of town. Because at that time, with the federal government and those policies that they passed on side, the major companies, Canadian Fish, BC Packers, and those decided that was the time that they were going to take on the union and bust it and gut the collective agreements.
2 minutes.
Okay. So in organizing, we organized the youth. And that youth were the ones that held the lines and refused to allow anything to cross those picket lines or anybody to cross those picket lines when they realized that us older people were fighting for their future. That was the strength that we had. And the problem with capitalism and the way they operate, they will use those tools to promise things to the younger workers at the expense of senior workers in negotiations. That's how they start to get collective agreements. And when you see big dues collecting unions negotiating and taking forever to negotiate a contract, they're not negotiating in the same manner. One of the unions, the operating engineers, would always sign a Me Too agreement to what our union paid for, went out and negotiated, and then claimed victory on the backs of what other members had done. And I think, with all of the stuff that we've been involved in, from Camano completion projects to standing with the Niska on their right to make self-determination and accept that treaty, that's what a trade union is supposed to be. It's not just about representing workers. It's about social justice, fighting for betterment of people, fighting for social programs that protect the underemployed and the unemployed and those most vulnerable in society. It's not going on as an organizer and making $100,000 and thinking you're king shit. It's about standing there representing those workers and doing what it is required. If you go to jail because of it, well, that's what you stood for. I'm very hardcore on that. Overpriced leadership is a danger to the trade union movement. I would make more money every year than Jack Nickel, who was the president of my union. I would make $30,000 more a year because the leadership always felt they had to be on the same level as the working class. And he would make $50,000 a year, and I was making 80. And it's that keeps that strength that I witnessed in the Fishermen's Union together and make us strong. Because just stand very quickly, fishermen never had the right to negotiate. Tendermen, the one that bring the fish in from the fish ground to the plants for processing, never had the right to negotiate. But because of the sheer strength of the union and the shore workers and all three sections refusing to sign any type of agreement until all three sections signed at the same time, is how we were able to negotiate such a strong future. I spent 35 years negotiating collective agreements, and I can tell you, there were days where we would go a week, 24 hours a day, sleeping on the floors, and that not, oh, well, I got to take a break now and go home and sleep. That's not how we negotiated. It was around the clock until the deal was hammered, because negotiations on anything is critical to get it done the most effective way possible in the best interests of those that you are representing. Because if you don't and it drags, that's how you start losing support. And I think it's something that much of the leadership in a lot of organizations tend to forget. And even with my own nations in the Haida Nations, the Council of Haida Nations, lots of times I have to stand up and remind them who they represent. We don't do this work to write a resume. We do this work that we do because we believe in our hearts it's the right step, it's the right thing to do, but do it in a way that doesn't discredit you or the people that you represent. Awa.
All right. Thank you so much, Arnie. Yes. Love hearing about your experiences and your history. So thank you so much for contributing. Okay. So Stephen Crozier is the past president of the New Westminster and District Labour Council. He's the Surrey Delta Regional Rep to the BC NDP Standing Committee on Environment and Economy, also known as SCOE. He's president of the Surrey White Rock NDP EDA, and he's a member of Socialist Action. Welcome, Stephen.
So, yeah, thank you very much for the speakers there. That's great. It's good to hear Arnie and Liz and their stories, and they're spot on with their observations about their experience for sure. And it's interesting to have someone like Arnie who's started so long ago, and then Liz when you're just kind of kicking off something, and the difficulties I think really remain the same. And that's a lot of that is about well, actually there's a difference as well. The one is that sort of hierarchy that ends up developing through time, and the other is the abuse that you get right off the bat when you're trying to do something. I mean, let's face it, this is about changing a power dynamic and actually making it fair. And as you said, Liz, as soon as you start taking that power away, people feel that they're somehow being confronted. I mean, if they only knew that it's better for everyone, including them, they'll live a better life because of it. But anyway, so I actually took a different approach, and thank you very much for those who came up with the questions. And I kind of like stuck to it. I think that one of the reasons I was chosen, or probably the reason, was my involvement in the environmental movement along with labor. And so I sort of took that approach. And then as I was going through the questions, I thought, well, there's overlap all over the place here. So I've got a few points about the environment, but it's generally about, the labor movement and and class class understanding, understanding our position from a class perspective. And I think that that's very important. One of the things that's important right now about the environmental movement and labor is that this is such an ideal opportunity for labor to get in there and take over the green economy. They're going to be building it. So why the hell are they stuck in the old paradigm? And I think Arnie, you pointed out part of that. And that is that you know they're afraid to move forward. They have their own power right now, and they're afraid of losing it. And of course, the average worker is afraid of losing their livelihood. So it's kind of understandable, but it's an opportunity lost if we don't. If labor does not work on this and get on top of it. So I just made a few points here to that end. And one being that, you know, if you look back at the 30s and 40s, we had the New Deal, which basically was something that bought off the workers, right? You know, we gave up on socialism for small gains. And I think that this is something we have to be aware of. You know, not so small in some ways, but we didn't finish the job. The job was done on us. And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we're transitioning in our economy right now. Then we moved on a kind of continuum from social unionism because there was a lot of solidarity among workers at that time to business unionism, which I would say kind of mm, it took a while. Like it was around the 70s, I think, that it really got instilled. But Arnie, you brought up solidarity there and how important that was for bringing together workers in BC. At the same time, generally speaking, you also brought up the problem, and that is that with business unionism, there's this sort of tendency for the upper echelon of the union to actually identify more with the capitalists employers than with the rank and file. And that's what's happened with unions, and it's continued. So, and I think in part, the business unionism, it sort of tends to reflect capitalist values, which is basically let's get more. We have to get more. And so, because you're bargaining within a capitalist structure. And so the idea of the social good, the public good goes out the window. You're not bargaining for that, and you should be. Um, the Yeah, okay. So there's a sort of tendency too that happened of dividing and conquer, so that you had the separate unions, you had the non-unionized employers, you had the unemployed, international workers, and rather than coming together, we fell apart. We were splintered, and that was a big problem. Then came neoliberalism of the 80s and free trade deals, which basically those are the free movement of capital, which destroyed the environment and destroyed unions and the working class. So recently, out of desperation, and that's been with us pretty much till now, but out of desperation, there is a kind of union movement now, or a workers' movement, let's say labor movement, that is trying to take hold again, and we'll see whether or not that happens. So, to bridge the divides that emerge under capitalism, solidarity must reach beyond the borders of union membership. And Arnie, that was something that you brought up, and unify the working class domestically and internationally. So, capitalism certainly reaches beyond its domain because right now, with that domain of profit, they're dictating political, social, and economic policy as well as union behavior. What's happening is unions are going hat in hand to pardon me, to corporations, for-profit corporations, asking for a little piece of the pie. Um, so this is, so they're actually reaching right into unionism itself. So one of the questions is, how does capitalism exacerbate divides between the labor movement and other social justice struggles? Basically, my response to that question is it is the divide. So capitalism, it does not live, it does not breathe we do, people do. And we suffer the consequences of those social injustices and the environmental degradation that we're experiencing, especially over the last couple of years. Um, so people have experiences, but capital does not. So while capitalism exists, and it will dominate and destroy our lives, and indeed, it is destroying life itself right now. Um, why? Because it has no empathy, and therefore there is no moral compass there. It does not care, and I think it's important for us to recognize and continue to say we do, because we do care. And I think that that's a fundamental thing that as socialists, we have to highlight that, especially when we're speaking about socialism and comparing it to the capitalist um, model that we're in right now. Um, but even our caring and our empathy is compromised by capitalism because we need to eat and we need shelter at the very least. And right now, that's becoming increasingly difficult for a number of people in the working class. So it's hard to think of social justice when you're hungry or unhoused. Under capitalism, we're all hungry for something. And what I got thinking about is the 2019 Korean film Parasite. I don't know if you've seen it, and I should watch it again because I don't remember it that well. But what I do recall is that on the one hand, you had this conspicuous consumption of the wealthy, the rich, who were totally dependent on the workers. They couldn't do anything on their own, and the workers, unfortunately, but it's not. I think it's a true sort of showing of this of where workers are at. They basically were parasites of the rich, meaning that they had to get their money, their livelihood from the wealthy, and they couldn't think of anything beyond moving up, if you will, in the world and having what it was that the wealthy had. So that's my recollection of the movie. Basically, that capitalism turns us all into parasites. Um, More specifically, then I wanted to share some of the stuff within the labor movement and with when it comes to the fossil fuel industry, and in particular TMX, LNG, and the tar sands. So with TMX, and this goes way back whenever they were negotiating with Kinder Morgan, the leaders of Kinder Morgan said, no, we're not going to use unionized workers. And yet the the trades union leadership continued to say we need TMX, we need the pipeline. So they were, you know, they were working against themselves. And this one a quote from Lionel Relton of the International Union of Operating Engineers says they were supporting it because it employs a lot of our men and women, but it wasn't employing any of their men and women at the time. They were being told that their men and women were not going to be hired. Of course, then the government, it was May 2018 that the government of Canada bought Kinder Morgan, bought the pipeline and allowed Kinder Morgan to the executives to
Two
give.
minutes.
Oh my goodness, is it really? Give them.
I'll give you a three if it
Okay, and I'll talk faster. But anyway, they gave themselves these huge bonuses. And I think this is something that sums up the problems that we have with unionism. And this was Mark Olson, president of the Labor International's Union of North America, so LIUNA. And this was in 2019. It may sound like I'm pushing, listen to this guy. It may sound like I'm pushing the corporate line, but it is the most environmentally conscious project in the world. I've seen how they pull back the forest in the Alberta oil sands, mine the sands in an open pit, extract the bitumen from the sand, and then put the sand and boreal forest back in place. We've seen the pictures, haven't we? He didn't say that. Anyway, you would never know the area had been mined. It's ethically and environmentally produced. Why would we use oil from other countries like Venezuela? We want to export to China. And now, what a huge lie that this guy is perpetrating there. I mean, we know that it's not true. Anyway, in the end, the unions managed to get 50% of the jobs on TMX, which is not very great. Just another thing with LNG, I went through a memorandum of understanding that they had between the building trades and LNG Canada. And the only thing about social performance was that they would hire locally. That was it. In the tar sands, they don't have unionized workers. There's a pipeline online has unions. What unions? The just transition legislation talks about unions, but there are no unions in the oil patch. So just to let you know about that. Let's see, why is competition? Why does capitalism seek to divide, conquer, and compete? How has this shown up in your experience? Well, what came to mind here was the scorpion crossing the river on the frog. And basically, you negotiate, you get everything, you get an agreement, and then what does the scorpion do? Bites the frog on the other end just before they reach. And they don't care whether they go down with the frog, okay? We are the frog. And it is in the nature of capitalists to act that way. I think you should also know that LNG Canada is a consortium led by Shell, and it also includes Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Korean Gas. And so that's and also, let's face it, the BCNDP. I mean, I'm a member involved, but I think it was just last week that they approved Tilbury and Cedar. So we're in a tough situation. How does business use perpetuate? Basically, with business unionism, the labor bureaucracy is bargaining with the capitalist system, within the capitalist system, where the only value is more, basically. As they get more, the chains of capitalism are strengthened. The labor bureaucracy has at least as much in common with their capitalist masters as the working people they represent or should represent. So I'll just wind it up then. What I was going to say there. Okay. Okay, so I'll wind up with the last couple of questions. How could class struggle unionism help bring together fractured elements under capitalist exploitation for common cause? Basically, because we would see ourselves as ourselves for what we really are. We're members of the working class rather than members of fractured elements of capitalism. I think that's very important that we do that. What are the obstacles? The lack of education and awareness. A lot of workers are not aware of socialism and of the class struggle that they should be in. Greed can take over. Hyper-individualism, lack of democracy within and outside of unions, lack of organizing, and actually Jane McAlevey came to mind whenever Liz, when you were talking. I don't know if you've read her, but she's really great. Holding on to power rather than using it. That's what our labor, basically the union leadership is doing. Stopping before we are finished. And I thought when Arnie brought up about solidarity, I thought that was important. And fear. So how does all this inform us about how to fight back? Keep the faith.
Right on. Thank you, comrade. Got through a lot there. I always appreciate hearing about all your experiences. And yeah, interesting. We haven't touched too much on the NDP, but maybe that can come up during question and answer time, because that's certainly one intersection, electoralism and unionism as well. All right. So next up, we are coming to Tristan Weibo. And I have Tristan's bio here. Tristan, him, is a community organizer and unionist. He's a BCGEU member and shop steward, local 403. His day job is as a support services program lead, working with people with chronic pain. And on his personal time, he helps out where he can to folks trying to get themselves organized, fed, heard out, or witnessed. Welcome, Tristan.
Thank you. Ní Tristan Díhaú, luam gódan nu need system a basc nu jagwa a yolgach the gódan tim sianu geen diwal wetgu at its amix diwal zogan. My name's Tristan. I'm really excited to see everybody here today and to be able to speak from the heart a little bit. I'm actually from similarly to some other folks up here, I'm from the north. I'm from Prince Rupert, Geen, and I moved down here to the Lower Mainland during the pandemic, in the first year of the pandemic. So I've been down here for a few years now, and I've been trying to think of sort of like these questions holistically and what I think that I can speak to and what I'd like to, and a lot of it's really more focused on, I think, pieces of my story. Not that I enjoy talking about myself endlessly a lot, but it's also the story that I know best. And I think that what I really want to highlight are some pieces of struggle, of difficulty, of the way the collective care showed up in my life and got me through it, and the questions that I've had along the way that still remain. So a little bit of background on who I am. I grew up in the North. I was born and raised in Rupert. I'm someone that juggles a lot of different intersections in my own life, which led to needing to rely on a lot of community and social services growing up as a youth from a very young age, needing to rely on my neighbors, on my family, on other students, on the people around me as much as I could to be able to get through difficult times. Eventually, this accumulated into I started my career in the community and social services sector in my early 20s. I worked first through some Aboriginal Indigenous servicing, and eventually joined as a counselor, as a unionized member several years ago, working with children and youth and supporting families who had experienced or witnessed violence in some sort of way. Um, Sorry, it's super distracted. Um, 1 second, give me one.
Yep. Yep. Been there.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Oh, good.
So, when I was up north, working, I was facing a lot of really incredible difficulty. I had a very hostile work environment, as many people have, and not to get too into all of the positions that I've been within, but I I found at the time that some of the obstacles that we were facing were significant. I supported workers that were facing direct physical violence from management. I supported folks that were facing physical and sexual violence as on the day-to-day job, especially within community and social services, especially working within health, where very often we're already under-resourced and under-supported, not only even just as a sector of work, but also as rural communities, even with a union, where very often, and we've talked so much about business unionism already, right? Where very often there's this sense of servicing and folks that are making 3 times as much money as the membership is, to actually not show up. And there were points though where I still continued to fight, because at the end of the day, the people that saw me through some of my largest personal obstacles were my fellow shop stewards. And not only on the workplace, but they came with me to doctor's appointments. They came with me when I was facing harassment and bullying, and we spent long nights writing letters. And I remember how it would be your 9 to 5 day would be your day job, and then your 5 to 11 is writing harassment letters, writing complaints to boards of directors, contacting folks from all over the northern region just to try and get organized. And at the time, I'm really sad to say this, but I we didn't win. And it's a fight that went on for years and years and years. And a lot of people left that work, and a lot of people sustained pretty serious psychological injury, and we did not win. and we kept fighting, and that work site is still fighting. And I've still supported them over the years and maintained my friendships there. And during that time, I wondered a lot, why can't we just leave? Why can't we just walk out? What is stopping us from all of us collectively picking up our stuff right now, walking out the door, standing on the sidewalk and saying, we're done? You know? And at the time, I think it was a complicated question that I really didn't have a lot of answers to. And I explored it a lot, and there were things that I would toss stuff on. Of course, there's management favoritism. Of course, there's nepotism in hiring. Of course, management brings in people that they know or are purposely going to disrupt and disturb the pot of workers that are there. Right? There were many of those things that were standing in our way, as well as some very real capitalistic barriers. People had kids, people had mortgages, people had things that they needed to worry about on a day-to-day basis. If someone is sick, they need to be able to pay for medicine. They have to go and get healthcare. When you're in the rural communities, you're having to travel very, very far distances for sometimes very basic levels of care. When you're faced with that many obstacles already and you're beaten down by a system that has continued to tell you that you are not worth even your own basic protections and liberties, how are you supposed to stand up in the face of an employer that has kind of mimicked a sort of parent-child-like relationship with all of us? How are you supposed to say no and run away? And truly all of you get up and stand outside? It was a really interesting, difficult question, and one where, I think we almost got to the point of pulling that trigger and walking out the door, and every time felt held back by a few people that just weren't there yet. So when I moved down to the lower mainland in 2020, I had left that job. I lost that job, unfortunately, after a very, very long battle for 2 years, that ultimately my employer truly ended up winning. When I left that and came down here, I stayed working within the notorious nonprofit sector, but this time at ununionized work sites. The first work site I joined, I moved for a board takedown within the first year because this also turned very rapidly into a hostile work environment where we faced a lot of ableism in particular, especially myself being autistic, a coworker being autistic. And once these things began to come out, the way that the employer responded to it was egregious. So I did what I knew how to do. I wrote letters, very, very long ones. I unmasked my confidentiality. I sent it to the board and I said, tell them my name and tell them I said this, and I quit. And it was only semi-successful. I got the place thrown on a fully paid hiatus for 5 weeks, to give everybody a break at the time when I highlighted that it was not tenable to have people working there, and I quit and I walked away. And then I joined another non-unionized nonprofit, and very quickly, immediately realized there too that these folks, maybe even more than the last group of folks, really needed a union. And I had that exact same question again of what would it take to actually have a situation where everybody collectively supports each other, and the ability to look forward to something like card signing, to something like maybe we can present some sort of form of solution, sort of became that avenue into building this sort of collective support. Much like Liz said, I think it's not even about the union you choose or the cards that you sign, right? It's that gathering together and doing a lot of that initial organizing that gets a ball rolling. So to the completely opposite advice that had been given to me, I decided to not do anything much of the normal way of organizing, because I decided I was impatient and it took too long, so I pulled everybody into a group meeting, and we all sat down and talked about it, and I kept it like a circle, and we all just took a moment to share. We invited former employees. We invited employees that were currently exiting. We talked about what the exit interviews were like. We talked about the problems that people saw, and we developed wage transparency. And we all revealed to each other what our salaries were. And we found significant gender gaps in pay. We found significant issues with most senior employees being some of the lowest paid workers and the heaviest overworked. And we found some really brutally awful hiring practices and things that fell into, much of this sort of neoliberalism piece of, we want to hire on folks with lived experience. We want to hire on people that look and sound a certain way, and that we don't want to support them. We don't want to train them. We don't want to listen to what it is they have to say, right? We're going to continue to pile on projects. In those initial conversations, I was amazed at how much just having a free-flowing kind of conversation where everybody takes a turn and everybody gets to speak their piece and be heard out within a group environment created a dynamic of solidarity that made a massive wave of change where within 2.5 months we had passed card check. And we passed that card check after, in another group staff meeting, we all had to sit there and hear our executive director make some comments that we really did not want to hear. I really did not want to hear about, again, us trying to voice issues of workload, right? And after that meeting, one of my coworkers came up to me and went, okay, let's do it. When are we signing cards? So we got those cards, we signed. I'm now a 403 member back in the BCGU. I chaired the bargaining committee. We ratified in 2023. So also similar to Liz, we passed card check in 2022. Thankfully, we got through ratification and we ratified in 2023. And a couple of things in that.
Minutes, Kristen.
Thank you. A couple of things in that I think really highlighted something really powerful and now kind of maintains the exact same question though. One thing in that early organizing drive from doing all of this relationship building with people, we got to the point where one of our most targeted members had some fear and was also incredibly brave and was willing to go through all of this knowing that the target was on their back for years and years and years. And amazingly, so many of us, about half of us, all got up and said, if they retaliate, I'll quit. And that was half of their staff right there, that were all prepared to resign on a dime. We had prepped a letter. We were going to do it if they had tried to push back. We created our own email address for the workers of our worksite, and we sent everybody an email as demands of the workers to say, hey, we're unionizing and you need to shut up and let us do it. Over the course of bargaining and afterwards, a lot of those original organizers got burnt out. A lot of them left because a lot of them have families. A lot of them have mortgages. A lot of them have cars to pay for. A lot of them have mouths to feed. A lot of them have disabilities that need time and care and energy and money. And there's kind of a certain point where that weight of capitalism creates such a huge wedge in that relationship building that we do with people, that it grows such a further and further divide that eventually almost everybody turned over. And there's only about half of our original staffing left from that original organizing drive. So my question remains still for me today, which is what does it actually take not only to build that momentum, because I think I found some of the answers to building that momentum, but to actually really maintain it in the face of everything that is incredibly difficult to us. I've found many of those answers in mutual aid. I've found many of that myself in the way that community has shown up for me when I've needed it most. I found it in the way that I've asked myself every day of my life what it is that we owe each other. I found it in the answers of, I think unionism is not so much, like I said, the card that you sign to, but it's as few as two people talking to each other about the work that they do and what they can do to change it, to make it work better for them. And I think that, the answer for how we all come together collectively and fight back to regain the power that we already have to actually be able to harness our own authority and really, really invoke that indignance in people. I think that's an answer that I can't hold alone because I think that's an answer that has to come from us collectively. That's an answer that we all need to step up and speak to with our little fraction of it, of what it is that we owe each other. and what we can do for one another to make sure that when we are getting these big pushes of momentum, how we maintain that, how we carry that through, and how we find ways to fight against the barriers and build bridges over the massive, massive taverns and crevices that capitalism does build in a divide. So I'll leave it there for now, hopefully on a little bit more of an uplifting type of note, really just to say collective and direct action gets the goods. And I really hope that we're entering an era of coming back to the basics of being a community and looking out for one another so that when it comes time to stand up and say something strong, we do it with the strength of the hundreds of thousands of us that are all fighting. Thanks, everybody.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that contribution, Tristan. That was really beautiful. And yeah, you brought up so many points. Oh, geez, you guys, where to begin? Very inspiring indeed. Thank you so much to all the panelists. So we'll open it up to dialogue, question and answer. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and I can read it out. Or if you'd rather ask it, you can raise your hand. For any of the panelists, really about any topic, or if you have a comment that you'd like to contribute, please go ahead. Okay, I'll give you guys a moment, a chance, because I have lots of questions. So, okay, go ahead, Helen.
Hi, I just wanted to say, the thing that I found most inspiring about Tristan's talk is that he acknowledged that they didn't win and they didn't win again, and yet you just keep going. And I just think that's, I find it very easy to feel a sense of defeat. And so I really, really admire that. And I also wondered if, you talked about what we owe each other and, engaging in that fight. There is going to come a time when you put down your tools and make a revolution happen. To this point, I wondered if you guys all heard Sean Fain's barn burning speech from the United Auto Workers. When he talked about, this is the time, the workers' time has come. We are fed up with the billionaires just leeching off of us. And if you can, I heard it this morning on, what's it called? Democracy Now! So I recommend having a listen, because that also gave me that same sort of invigorating little frisson of excitement to think, wow, stick with it. And this could really, maybe this is the moment for us. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Helen. Anybody feel like responding to that? Okay, I'm Leslie and Pete from Socialist Alternative. Are you responding or do you have another question?
Oh, well, I want to make a comment, and it's going back to the beginning part of the meeting where both Arnie and I think Stephen talked about Solidarity 1983 and how important that movement was for workers in BC, and not just workers. It extended beyond the organized working class, beyond unions, to broad social sector. And I think comments were also, Arnie made comments about unions needing to be involved in the broader struggles of the day, not just in their own specific demands, which of course are really important. So what I'm wondering about is just thoughts on around how that sense of solidarity among the working class can be strengthened in BC, given some of the concerns that were raised about the bureaucratizing of the unions, the tendency to business unionism. How can we build a working class that really does understand the collective power of workers and the working class because, we ended with revolution, but we can't create a revolution. We can, what are the conditions for that to happen, that we can actually act when there is that kind of spirit and sentiment in BC. So just interested in comments about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie. Pete, do you want to chime in there?
Oh, yeah, it was great to remember solidarity again. Maybe to respond to Leslie, how I work in construction. I'm a carpenter, and been getting pretty upset about the number of deaths on job sites. They're about double the yearly average just last year. So trying to organize. Well, the workers just aren't getting the training they need anymore, and they're sent out to do jobs they have no idea how to do safely or well. Or well, maybe it is kind of Orwellian. And it seems to be an issue that every worker I talk to is either in construction or anywhere else knows how much more dangerous work is now than it was, and seems to be something that workers want to rally around. And something where we could really show the power that we have. If anyone wants to join in, I'll get my contact information out there.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, and I should just reiterate, I'll put in the chat here a link to just a form for a mailing list, and also an invite to the Discord server. Again, just so that we can keep in touch. I think today is more of a starting point than anything else. And just to kind of quickly comment, and then I'll, back to the panelists and Arnie, if anyone wants to respond to what's been said so far. I think it's always an important observation that we can't force the revolution to happen, because I think a lot of people kind of think we can do that. But kind of what Stephen was alluding to earlier as well, like capital has its own logic of accumulation, which oppresses us because it just is extremely unbalanced and enters our political system, right? So capitalism is going to do the declining, the degrading, the contradicting all on its own for us. I think we're seeing that now. As Stephen alluded to a little bit, we had the New Deal, which provided a little bit of a curtailing of the extreme forms of capitalist exploitation. But here we are, we're back again, right? And just as the socialists and communists and everybody anti-capitalist had said would happen, because when you have such a power and resource imbalance, this is inevitably always where we end up. So we're seeing more intensive contradictions and skirmishes with the police, things, clearly it's late stage now. So how, I guess the question for me, and part of why I wanted to put this on and get folks involved, is because how do we ready ourselves for those moments to mobilize eventually when the opportunity does present itself well, in order to try to actually have some kind of sustained movement that doesn't just fizzle out and it becomes leaderless and breaks into sections and whatnot. All of the experiences that we go through, individually, collectively, as a group, and just historically, I think is valuable because it teaches something to us. And I think one of the primary, I'll stop soon, but one of the primary objectives of socialists is to kind of educate and expose the masses as things are happening, about what is happening and why it's happening, and the class antagonism that's at the heart of so many of our social crises. So, this is one of those moments to me, whether it's from Palestine to cost of, housing affordability, like everything is just popping off. And, the common denominator is capital accumulation. So with all that said, we'll go to Arnie. And again, any of the panelists that want to jump in, please do. We've had some comments about Sean Fain. The objective conditions of revolution. This is always a fun topic. And workplace safety and worker deaths. All right, to you, Arnie.
What I wanted to touch on, listening to people speak, and Leslie and Peter, we got to realize that society right now is in a survival mode with the cost of living, housing security, income security. And what we see happening is a provincial government that has jumped on the wagon of big corporation development. And I'll use this as an example. They preach so loudly that they passed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. At the same time, they turn around and send in the troops against the Unistoten. They negotiate, like with the Enbridge pipeline and stuff, they negotiate with band councils as though the band councils are an elected government. They know what they're doing is illegal and they continue to do it. Band councils under the old Indian Act, well, still under the Indian Act, are in charge of administration of funds for the band. They do not negotiate for the entire nation. And the NDP and others are circumventing it. I quit the NDP because of that reason, and I won't support them. I've always told them I'll vote every name on the ballot because I cannot, as a First Nations person in good conscience, put my tick beside the NDP that supports them. And that's coming from somebody as a Haida who just signed the title agreement with the province. What we see in this province is many First Nations climbing into bed with big development. LNG is the prime example in Kitimat, where idiot Ross, as I call him, told him that to his face too. You're an idiot. And I know you're an idiot. So I just wanted to let you know. But they take their leadership, the hereditary chiefs, to court to silence them against their opposition to the Enbridge or to the LNG pipelines. That system of hereditary chiefs is what held the First Nations people together for tens of thousands of years and held them together during the major attacks when the Indian Act was first introduced. They do not, it's the greed. Capitalism has no race. Capitalism doesn't give a shit where it goes. When you jump in that bandwagon with greed in your eyes, you turn your back on everything. And I think we got to realize we can say all the good words we like here tonight and everybody agrees with us, but it's a really uphill battle right now. It's not going to be an overnight thing. Hell, I've been fighting the fight for 35 years on so many issues, and we're still here. I guess that's a good thing. But big companies, multinationals, the Jimmy Pattersons and others, the Galen Westons, have the ear of the politicians. Because with all of this First Nations crimes that are going on that happened under the Indian Act and are still occurring today through the taking of children from families through the ministry. Not much has changed towards First Nations people. The Indian Act still discriminates hugely for those that want to apply for status. The Indian Act denies so many rights to First Nations people that should be registered and have those rights. Why, if anything is going to be settled in this country or even in this province, the title for all First Nations has to be recognized. I'll say this, and I've said it before, and I've spent 25 years of my life fighting in the Haida Nation to make sure that they never entered into a land claim agreement. We own it. And we're finally got halfway there. We got title to the Haida Gwaii. But land claims agreements are termination. It's a termination process. Surrendering things, forcing First Nations back into a reserve style type of thinking on smaller lands, like the Niska. They got what? I think it was 7% of their whole traditional lands. But that was a decision they had to make. I can't say whether it was right or wrong. All I know is a Haida was fighting for full control of our island, and we've managed to get that. So far, still got to get through the fence. But the issue is, and we're seeing it, and it's starting to develop. When you start mounting a fight and trying to unify people, the biggest tool that is always used by companies and those that are against the type of a movement, they start to bring out the racist card. And once you put that racist thought into somebody's head, it's a very hard thing, because the first impression is the hardest impression to remove from somebody's brain. Seen it, fought it. And I think all you have to do is bring up the word land claims. And what's the first thing? Or even when they were talking about the compensation for residential and day schools and that, oh, them Indians just want more money. They just want free money. And that's what you hear. And people start to believe it. I live in the north. I've been to Smithers. I've been to Houston. I go to Terrace and I listen to that nonsense. I'm a little bit camouflaged. I'm one of the guys that was in there with Custer, found out what he was doing because I was camouflaged, and I was one of those Indians that went back and told the rest of them what was going on so he could get a nice welcoming. But I hear so much on the racist card, whether you're in a safe way or not, and people start to think it. All we have to do is look at the United States, where they go after the Mexicans. Illegal intruders. They're the first peoples. That was their traditional territories that they're being denied access to because of a right-wing agenda. And that's happening here in Canada and in British Columbia. And it's
1 minute.
Yeah, I'll get it done here. 1 sec. And it's being done by a provincial government who is blindsided by big industrial development and people who are desperate to make a living to feed their families, to the point that they go to Alberta and all around Canada to try and save their homes and their families have a proper lifestyle. And until that is corrected, that's going to be the fundamental problem that we're going to have to try and keep building unity with that desperation.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such a good point about everyone being desperate. It's so true, as Liz was saying, like, it just makes everything that much harder. And as Tristan was saying, people have families, we got jobs, we got responsibilities, like we're just hammered down, and it does make folks more vulnerable to being incentivized away from the cause with material security, which, as a Marxist, I can't hardly really completely judge someone for. Zach, I see your hand. Any other panelists want to respond to what Arnie has said? There was a lot in there: Indigenous rights, NDP, material deprivation. Oh, I saw a hand. Okay, so we're going to go to Liz to respond, and then to you. All right, Zach.
Sorry, Zach. Sorry, my small niece wanted to come join the meeting.
Hello.
Yeah, Arnie, I thought I really resonated with a lot of the stuff that you said. And one thing that I always think about with the policies from the NDP that really gets to me is I have an Indigenous sister and a white sister. And my Indigenous sister, because of the harms associated with colonialism, is on disability because violence and injustice give a lot of people a lot of disabilities. So whenever I see them wearing the orange shirts, which is, I'm so pleased that many people are engaging those kinds of events now, and that there is, I think, a big change. More people are talking about the ongoing genocide and colonialism. But when I see people from the BC NDP doing that, and I know that systematically they're giving my niece, my bigger niece, and my sister, who are Indigenous, $500 a month to pay for their rent, which is the shelter portion of their disability check. I want to just like dump water on them and scream for 1,000 years. So it's just, yeah, we have to look at what's happening on the ground. Yeah, what is happening to people, and not what people are saying and what they're saying they support. And I think that there's actually, with how bad things are getting, more people, I think, are open to hearing about people's material lived experiences. And I think that that will be strengthening our movements, just like the reality. I sometimes like to say, like reality is critical of capitalism. Like reality is showing us now that it's not fair, it's not right, and people can see that and understand that. I hope that more people are talking about that now.
Thank you so much. I love that. I'm probably going to steal that slogan. if, if it's collective property, Liz, reality is critical of capitalism. That's amazing. Okay, Stephen, are you responding, or you have a new question?
Yeah, no, just very quickly, I think responding to Leslie's question, part of it is getting active within your unions, and it's going to be tough because you have to fight through that, the bureaucracy, fight against it. But I think what you find as you get more active is that you have a lot of comrades that you can fight with. So I think that that's very important. And yeah, and just to Arnie's point, like absolutely, one of the problems we're in is that we have corporate governance. That's really what it is. We're governed by corporations. We're not really governed by a democracy. And so that's something we have to change. Proportional representation, that's a step anyway. That's all.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Okay, Zach, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, all the panelists, for great insights. Really appreciate that. Nice to see so many people here too. Just hanging out with a sick kid watching Dora the Explorer. So hopefully you guys can't hear Dora in the background. But yeah, my question was just around leadership within the union space. I mean, I'm a BCGU member and have been getting involved in kind of the lower level leadership. Hopefully this holds. Stand by. Okay, I'll do my question in a moment here. I'm sorry, I have to attend to this.
Absolutely, it's all good. Children, am I right? I got two. Okay, but that's great because I actually have some comments. I would like to jump in. If anybody else does, again, I'm not seeing all of the people, so try to use your emoji hand, or I am monitoring the chat if you want to put something in the chat. So I guess I'll go to a theme that I've picked up on here, which is, I think, super awesome, and something that like I've personally been thinking for a while, but it's not something that's like very I don't know, platformed or common or whatever in the socialist organizing world. I feel like, and is that like psychological social support aspect of being in an organization, of having comrades and having camaraderie and solidarity, and feeling like there's a common project. It's such a sort of immediate antidote to some of the like hopelessness and powerlessness that you feel when thinking like, I'm up against literally the most powerful, most well-resourced forces in the world. So I don't know if you guys want to just talk about that a bit more. Like, what does sort of camaraderie mean for you? And I think it's something interesting too, that, and I guess not a surprise, that I feel like this discourse is developing or coming through a little bit more with this generation of folks, with our younger people who do tend to be quite psychologically introspective, I guess I'll say. And so I know, back some of the older slogans are like camaraderie and fraternity, humanity, I think, and fraternity is passe now because of the gendered language. But to me, that's kind of what that concept was going for. And I don't know, maybe we need a revival about it. Maybe we need to be more open about this aspect of organizing, because as I alluded to a bit earlier, like, it's hard to be, as I find it personally, very hard to be a socialist in our society, openly a socialist. Like, I've already burned a few bridges in town here with some of the people, NDP people I was organizing with, because we decided to disrupt David Eby's member event with a Palestine protest. And so that's done. And now, while on the one hand, it's been so inspiring and wonderful, and I'm glad that I reached out and even started doing some little protests in this small rural town, and now we have a little gaggle of activists. So it's like I've gained them and some solidarity, and then I've like, it's hard not to feel like, especially in this McCarthyism, resurgent era, like we are kind of being watched, and maybe there's at one point, we're going to be doxxed, or it's a similar kind of situation, I'm sure, like all the students are feeling right now, being publicly like a Marxist, a communist, especially in, I know for myself, like a small town, more kind of reactionary environment, it is, it's straining, and it takes a kind of like psychological like will, but having a community of people that share those values, that will have your back, that are that will protect you, and it's just such a valuable part of organizing that I feel like doesn't get brought up enough. But it's fundamental, because if we don't have that, how are we supposed to continue on? We wouldn't do anything if we thought everything was hopeless, or if we're so in mental distress that we can't do anything. And burnout is a very common experience among us organizers, I think, for that reason too, right? So we do work ourselves to a state where we can't do anything anymore, and that's not healthy. So and I think, as Tristan was saying, community care aspect is a really critical way that I'm hopeful we can try to work through some of those the desperation that capitalism has put us under, and that under resourcing and lack that we feel. Because I know myself, it's hard to cover everything, all the responsibilities, the obligations, the goals. We're constantly running, and you can't do it all. So this is where others stepping in and providing community care for you, I think, could be something that could really advance the cause and the class struggle. And maybe we haven't appreciated that as much as we should have. Okay, so those are my comments. And Zach, we'll go to you.
Hello. I'm back. Yeah, I think my question has a little bit of overlap with yours too there, but so might be good together. But Yeah, just like I was saying, I'm a member of BCGU, and for the last couple of years, have started to get involved with kind of like the lower level leadership positions, which, as I'm sure many people here that are involved with their unions know, like isn't that much of an accomplishment because often they're just left empty because there's so little involvement with people's unions in these days. But I guess I was just wondering about what people's thoughts are just on being a leader in your union, because I think there's a lot of perspectives, like there's a lot of angles, and I think some of that is people's political views of how things will work better, and I think some of it is also just maybe like what Flo's talking about, like also just burnout and like maybe not wanting to put themselves out there, the McCarthyism aspect of things that you mentioned there. And I think I have this conversation a lot with, say, people that are really new to the space of getting involved with their union, and having conversations about, encouraging people and wanting people to get involved and get involved, but also hoping that some of them also want to not just be involved, but put themselves out there and be like, and speaking of Tristan, having Tristan here, which is fantastic. Tristan's doing this himself and running for a high level position in the BCGU at our upcoming convention. I really appreciate him doing that, which is just awesome. Putting yourself out there and putting your name and saying, this is what I stand for. And I think also the flip side I wanted to talk about too, whereas when I talk to some leaders that have made that jump and have been, say, relatively successful, say in my union or other unions, and have some decently good politics, but then are also, I think, take poor positions where they still try to play this game where they try not to reveal themselves to like their enemies of who they are, and they try to reveal who they are to their friends, kind of. And like it just seems like what we need kind of the people that I feel like Ernie kind of brought up at the start of his piece, where he talked about some of those principled leaders that I think didn't view this as a career move, viewed this as a sacrifice that you were making for your community, and took steps like being like, I'm not going to get paid more than any of you, I should get paid less than you, or whatever it is, right? But making those bold moves, and kind of like putting themselves into the fray, into this dangerous territory of a world where that your enemies are just going to want to attack you at every turn, and you have to have a pretty strong backbone to be there. So just wondering what people's thoughts are on that. If people think, I guess, sorry, one last thing I wanted to add to that too is that I think there's really important angle to this, that I think also leadership of the working class, I'm sure many people would agree, is not just about people being in official positions. It's also about the rank and file leading, it's about wildcat strikes. It's about people organizing themselves, not just through their official union structures. But I think it's not just about that. I think in this day and age where we have, the rank and file members, like most of us, are so unorganized, that it's also so helpful when those people step up into those positions and then turn around and say, like, hey, I'm one of you, and I'm not here for a career. I'm here to like fuck shit up, and I hope you'll join me in that cause. So if anybody has comments on that, I would welcome it. Thanks.
First step, Zach, if you're going to become part of a leadership, is you got to realize that it's not an 8 to 4 job. It's a 24/7 job. Because a lot of the times when workers want to talk to you, it'll be outside of the workplace because they're intimidated. In regards to the McCarthyism and all of that, red baiting and all that shit, I put up with that for 35 years. And you know what? I says, well, just call me Arnie, Commie. Just call me Arnie. So what I did, and a lot of the politicians used to call me that too. Joe Oliver, who was the Minister of the Environment for the Tories, He says, you sound like a communist. I says, I am. Matter of fact, you guys pay to support the party because I make a political donation of $100 every year to them, just so that it's on my income tax. If you're going to let that kind of stuff scare you, then you're not doing yourself any favors. Like they told me is that they've been monitoring me when I was supposed to meet with Joe Oliver on the Enbridge fight back. Oh, we've been following you. We've been hearing what you've been saying at meetings and all of these things. And I went, oh, well, that's nice. And then he canceled my meeting. So I sent him an email. I says, well, just add what you told me in my last email to my thesis file. I'm trying to make it 6 feet high before I die so I can leave a good legacy for my kids. But if you think I'm scared of you guys telling me that you're monitoring me, I says, I'm not afraid. I don't give a shit. If you're good, that's what the game is intimidation. And if you're going to let them intimidate you, then you put yourself at a weakness. Because when you show them strength and you're not afraid of their bullshit and their intimidation, they're the ones that back down. And the last thing, if you're going to be part of the leadership, first thing you got to learn, hate the boss with a full passion and teach your membership how to hate the boss. Because then when it comes time to mount a fight back, you've got the support behind you and the boss knows it.
Thank you, Arnie. Absolutely. Great response. I will note that we are observing a speakers list for the next time you want to chime in there. It's all good. It was a direct response. So Stephen and Tristan, are you wanting to respond to that same sort of comment? Yeah, and you as well, Stephen. Hey, so we'll go to Stephen, then Tristan, and then back to Leslie and Pete for a new question.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short. A couple of things. It's just, it really is important that people get involved and, as Arnie was saying, kind of stick it out for a while. Just my own experience with when I was president of the Labor Council, we had 60,000 members and about 100 showed up to our meetings. And those were also during COVID, they were online. And still, we only had about 100 people. So you don't get a lot. And what tends to happen is that if you want to say the central leadership sort of like moves in and takes over and fills up the space. Now, when I was the president, unfortunately, I didn't have quite as good a. I mean, I wasn't afraid, but what happened was I got a lot of flack for the positions that I took, and in fact, now. I get messages from the Vancouver and District Labour Council. I do not get messages from the New Westminster and District Labour Council. I think I ruffled too many feathers. They didn't like it whenever I spoke out at socialist meetings, I should say socialist events whenever I was a speaker. I was at one of the labor strikes, and the secretary treasurer said something about she was speaking there, and she said, "We don't want all the pie, we just want part of it." And I said, "No, we want it all." And so different things like that were kind of not taken very, very well. So I think you might lose your position, but don't lose yourself.
Very well said, Stephen. Okay, going to Tristan next, and then Fraser, you have a new question? Just confirming. Yes, okay. Sounds good. Go ahead, Tristan.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in mostly on this topic of actually kind of building leadership, I think, when we're organizing with folks, because the reflection that I wanted to share is that I actually have endeavored to eliminate every job position that I've ever held, because most of them should not exist. When I was a counselor for children and youth experiencing violence, that was not a job that should have existed on so many levels. And one of those is because that piece of labor was co-opted by a colonialist movement that took it away from the people that were already doing it better to begin with, but a bunch of pieces around it that made it fail. And I see this happen continually again, particularly in social services and social work, and in many of our other systems that really took something that was already functioning here, ripped it away from people, stuck a new label on it, and called it their own, right? And so I think in many ways, there is a type of thinking that has come from me endeavoring to see so much of my own work dissolve and return to community that has also made me think about leadership in a lot of the same way. Right. I think when it comes to building that leadership capacity, because it's true, leadership is something that scrambles people's brains. And a lot of the reason for that, I think, is not just because solely the people that end up in leadership are maybe inherently about to be like that, right? But also because folks in leadership, I think, if I were to give any sympathetic view of leadership, and I out myself massively as an anarchist when I say anything sympathetic to leadership and struggle to do so. But what I do see there is there's a lot of having to make incredibly difficult decisions within a vacuum in a system that is inherently meant to fail all of the time, where none of the answers are going to be ideal. And I think that takes a significant spiritual toll on people. And like Arnie mentioned, when you're working 24/7, I personally think that's actually a really shameful place to be in. I actually think that there's quite a lot of embarrassment that I hold for our leadership, whether it's within unions, within our work sites, within our communities, that really have such a fervent commitment to something that maybe doesn't need to exist in the way that it does, that pulls their commitment away from their spiritual values, from their community, from the people that they love, that would otherwise really hold them up and keep them grounded within where they need to be able to keep going. And I think that those are also all aspects of leadership that every single one of us holds within our families, within our friends, within the activities that we engage in, that if we don't continue to sort of spread the leadership around, we lose sight of things a lot. And so what I see for a lot, even if we think about leadership on an organizing level, which is much easier for me to talk about actually as a community organizer, that helps a lot with downtown East Side initiatives, housing initiatives, and supports many, many, many folks at a time. I think one thing that's really important is building in redundancies as much as possible. So I think when we're trying to get people engaged and get them active as their own community leader, as their own sort of union or workers leader, we need to make their role as redundant as possible, right? I'm someone that lives with disability, and I'm also someone that tries to really show up as much as I can and provide the skill and knowledge that I've built along the way for folks that are feeling like there's a gap there. But sometimes I need to step away, because the reality is all of this is a marathon and not a sprint. And if we keep on powering through it, we are going to burn out some of the people that are wanting to commit to themselves or commit to this the most, right? So being able to step back because the roles that I hold in community have redundancy is a huge amount of freedom, right? When other people, and especially I think an important role of leadership that's often missed or completely failed on, people need to identify other folks that have skills, right? That have value, that have drive, that have motivation, that have passion, that are incredibly good at the things that they do. And we need to transfer all of those among each other so that we can all be a jack of all trades. Because I think that that's really what leadership needs to be, is as much as possible shared and collaborative position that is, taking direct communication and notes from the people that they seek to serve, from their neighbors, from their community around them, to really kind of increase not just this sort of polarizing situation that I think we feel a lot on the union floor, right, as rank and file members, where sometimes it feels like you're just screaming into an abyss, right? To actually bring leadership a little bit more down to ground by building in these redundancies to make everyone have those skills and to be able to have their voice heard. So that's my thought on building leadership.
Amazing. Thank you, Tristan. Yes, so much good stuff there. agree with so much. And I'll just say this quickly. We're getting towards kind of the end of it, but yeah, it's such an important topic. Leadership, one I'm glad came up because it is the problem of leadership was on the greatest obstacle often in our path, to quote Trotsky. So maybe next year, if we do this again, I think that would be an excellent theme and something to explore a little bit more, because there's so much to dive into there. What is behind, what's up with that relationship between leadership and hierarchy and power and anti-democracy. There's something going on there 100%. And how I love how you put it, Tristan, building in redundancy. That's very wise, because yes, that's what I was trying to get at. Like, we need each other, we need to fill each other's gaps, otherwise we're not gonna last at all. So excellent. Thank you very much. Let's go to Leslie and Peter. We'll have some discussion on that question or comment. And then Fraser, I think we'll leave it there unless anybody raises their hand in the next couple minutes here.
Hi. I'd just like to go back to that old-fashioned idea that came up of fraternity. It's really been the last couple of years I've been especially noticing in the organizations that I work with, the extreme importance of something that I've been calling emotional solidarity. And because in the work we do is so hard, and it's mentally, emotionally, socially, and to have each other's emotional backs seems to be a lot more vital than saying having each other's backs, or making sure we all agree on the tiniest differences of ideology, for instance. And I was leading a job action last month with a crew of 15, all leftists of some stripe or other. And I was amazed at the fear they all had. And the emotional solidarity was a huge part of the solidarity that got us through to win.
Thank you so much for those comments, Pete. Nathan, I see that's in response to Pete.
Nope, I got something else to say. I'll go after Fraser.
Okay, sounds good. And then I think we are gonna have to wrap it up, comrades. So think quick about where you're gonna put your hand up. All right, go ahead, Fraser.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to thank our comrade panelists for a really inspiring talk and for sharing their wisdom and their insights. I feel like I've developed and learned a lot, so thank you. I just wanted to ask a question to like whoever wants to answer it, or whoever feels they can answer it. I live in Kelowna, British Columbia, so it's not a very small town, but it's a smaller city, not a very active labor movement. And I was just wondering if people who have experience with like building solidarity and like trade unions and participating and building up the labor movement in an area where there's not much activity and in like a smaller rural area, if you could share any insights on how to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Fraser. It's sure a unique challenge.
Is it okay if I respond to that?
Yes, please. Oh, and I see Tristan too. So Liz, then Tristan.
Oh, sorry, Tristan. I was just
sorry,
thinking
Liz.
Talking.
We're all taking turns. It's all good.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, Fraser, thanks for your comments. I just like to take such a long view on things, and I think I got that from like doing social work stuff and having like family members who've been through a lot of struggles where like you don't know the value of something for a long time. And I like to think of like each act that we do taking on kind of its own life. Like if you are in a store and someone looks like they're having a hard time and you're a customer and you ask them if they're their manager and they say they're not a manager, and you just tell them that they could unionize and that they can actually do it without even having a vote, and that the first step is to contact unions. And then you just walk out of the store that day, like you'll never know if that does anything, but it's something I like to do, and I like to think that it could do something. So just every little act, like it may not come together in a way that you will ever get to see or understand, but like just keep planting seeds. Yeah, like Flo was saying, just keep planting seeds, just keep talking to people around you.
Very wise words there. Thanks, Liz. Tristan.
Yeah, I will touch this super quickly because I know that we're coming up on time, but just to share a couple of the bullet points of things that I've done that I've found successful, especially with folks where even though my work site that we organized here is technically Lower Mainland based, we have folks that are actually it's like we have folks that are actually Canada wide, and many people that are not familiar with unions at all, or even come from areas of the world where unionism is so extremely heavily suppressed that it's never been on their radar. And things that I found to be really helpful are number one, be friends first, right? Like get to know the people that are around you, the folks that are in your community, especially those that you're working with. If you're trying to organize your own worksite, get to know them as people, figure out what matters to them, figure out what they really love about that work, what drove them to that, what value was there. And if it was bread and butter, we can talk about bread and butter unionism, right? Also really helps to identify the issues that they have. It helps to make staff maps of places that you work so you can clearly keep track of who's who and where they are sitting on opinions and how close they are to management. Other really extremely nerdy things that I did was I started developing documents with doodles and visuals explaining the history of unionism in Canada, how we went from master slave contracts into the British common law, into introducing the collective bargaining regime, and explaining the differences between the law of contracts and the collective bargaining regime to folks that didn't know about the legalistic component of unionism. Stuff like that is actually genuinely helpful. Knowing a little bit about labor history, even 100, 150 years back, surprisingly useful for setting pieces of context. And it's not that you have to bombard them with the PowerPoint slides and the documents and the information all in one sitting. I wouldn't do that, although sometimes I do. But having little bits of resources that you can pepper into conversations. When people do bring up a problem, having a tidbit, having a fact, having something that you can introduce to them in that moment. And like Liz said, doing it over time, expecting that it's going to be a marathon. A lot of organizing drives can take months to years, right? To really get there, and keeping in mind along the way that what you're doing is movement building, right? What you're doing, your larger goal is already being accomplished in the day-to-day of connecting with people, of sharing this information, of planting those seeds, of getting that knowledge out there so that people continue to think about it and disseminate that information. So those are some of my thoughts. And also I am totally cool if people want to poke me about funny little things that I've tried doing. I'll drop my personal email in the chat if folks want it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I hope you and everyone else can join the Discord. And if you're open to sharing any of those materials as resources, that sounds very handy to me, because now we don't have to put together a whole nother one. So I'll leave that up to you, but I would definitely like to see that. And maybe that's kind of some of the stuff that we can start doing, is sharing as a network, our resources, our material, our tools, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and we can, try to lower the threshold of the work and everything that we've been talking about, and the dangers of burnout and everything. Tristan, you sound like you have a lot of knowledge, so maybe we should do like a workshop or something these days too. That sounds fun. I like that you like spreadsheets. Into that. Okay. Nathan, there's your question, and then we shall wrap it up, comrades.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll be very brief. With my eye on the time, I just want to do just general shout out for everyone who came to this and helped organize it. Especially, for example, Pete, who I know hates Zoom more than life itself. And I really appreciate you being here and your cowboy hat too. Jane, little Jane there, who's paying rapt attention to the meeting. Hi, Jane. Ernie's cat. Hi, Ernie's cat. The theme of this meeting is bridging divides under capitalism, and I just think it's worth taking a moment to just reflect on this meeting itself, and that it's brought together a bunch of different organizations who've helped to kind of put it on, and especially to Flo for leading the charge on this and for helping to make this happen. And I'm fairly new to class politics, I guess, and it's been a very inspiring and for me to get into it, but also demotivating or demoralizing a little bit when you start to understand the fractions in the left and about the divides that are spring up between us sometimes. And I just really love that we've had this meeting and we've all kind of come together to put it together, and I hope that it turns into something going forward and some degree of collaboration going forward, and hopefully another May Day Solidarity Summit 2025.
Heck yeah, I'm down. We already got some good ideas. So just, in closing, thank you so much to the panelists. Honestly, did even better than I could have expected. You guys have such different perspectives and experiences, and really appreciate everybody's participation, everybody who showed up tonight. This is some really like a great jumping off point, I think, for tomorrow, which is May Day, International Day of the Worker. Hell yeah. So whatever we're doing tomorrow and this upcoming weekend, let's just bring this spirit of solidarity and collective action to it and keep moving forward, and thank you so much to everybody. This has been really wonderful.